Hello, welcome to Herp Corner, where we'll be discussing the crooked worm lizard, also known as Amphisbaena camura. They're a diurnal species of amphisbaenid that's commonly mistaken for others of the same family. I only say this because on my quest for images of this animal for today's episode, this is the entire page I had to work with. Half of these aren't even worm lizards. I've only really got 4 photos of this species to work with, but I suppose it's better than nothing. Based on those images, we can see their bodies are divided into anoli, which are ring-like segments dividing their body, not unlike those of a worm. This helps them locomote similarly underground. They're considered a spade-headed worm lizard for their snout-specific shape. A worm lizard, or Amphisbaena, can be considered one of 4 categories in regards to their snout's shape, as well as the way they dig. Shovel-headed, where they force their heads into the dirt upwards and then downwards. Spade-headed, which is like our friend here, where they spiral through the soil. Keel-headed, where they push the dirt side to side as they dig. And bullet-headed, where they barrel forward through the dirt. The crooked worm lizard, much like the rest of their family, has underdeveloped eyes and an acute sense of hearing. They're able to listen for any prey above ground and any predators nearby. The end of their tails are designed to mimic their heads to confuse predators. This is also common in worm lizards. In the wild, crooked worm lizards will whip predators with their tails to make them think they've been bitten. Additionally, they're able to drop their tails, but they use that ability more conservatively than most lizards. They're similar to snakes in that their lungs are asymmetrical. Snakes have a left lung that's drastically reduced in size so it fits their body better. Worm lizards, especially the crooked worm lizard, have a right lung that's tiny. Also, real quick, can I just mention how weird it is that of the few image results for the crooked worm lizard, there's a picture of my own snake and some Terraria fan art I did on my Tumblr? What the hell? Anyway, they were discovered in 1862 by Edward Drinker Cope, an American comparative anatomist, paleontologist, ichthyologist, and herpetologist. Crooked worm lizards have been reported to be found in Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay, though it's important to note that their distribution lacks enough information to conclusively say that they can only be found in those areas. Despite this general lack of specimens, they're judged by the IUCN Red List as least concern, meaning their population numbers are not threatened in the slightest. Crooked worm lizards are often found in tropical and subtropical forests, as well as humid Chaco habitats. Other than that, there are no major threats to this species documented, and they're not known to be hunted or anything similar. Also, quick fun fact, worm lizards aren't technically lizards. So they're squamates, meaning they're a part of the taxonomic order Squamata, which contains lizards, snakes, and amphisbaenians. Amphisbaenians, of course, includes worm lizards. Now, I'm not entirely sure why they were called worm lizards if they're not actually lizards, but I think we'll be okay. Based on care for similar species, the crooked worm lizard would be a rather simple animal to care for. The estimated lifespan is roughly 16 years, where they get up to 10 inches, so a little larger than an adult crested gecko. Based on that, the average enclosure should be 20 gallons. Either a glass vision cage or a storage tub would work fine. Storage tubs have less ventilation and pack humidity better, whereas glass enclosures make heat lamps easier to manage. The conditions within it should be hot and humid. Fellas who live in Latin America can attest to this. It's incredibly hot and incredibly humid. A basking spot should be provided at one far end of the enclosure. The spot itself should be 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which will undoubtedly raise the ambient temperature. Ambient humidity should be at around 80%. Since the basking lamp is so hot, it may be hard to keep moisture in the air. That's where the substrate will come in. Generally, for fossorial species, I'd say not to give them repticarpet or anything similar as a substrate, but that's especially the case with species that have as high of temperatures as this one. Layers of soil hold moisture much better, as well as just, being the bare minimum for this species, considering they're burrowers in the wild. The best substrate for you to use would probably be a mix of Exoterra plantation soil with sphagnum moss. On that note, a good 5 to 7 inches of soil should also be provided. As usual, since you're working with dirt, it's imperative that the enclosure is a bioactive one, with a drainage layer, plants, and cleanup crew to prevent mold buildup and acidic soil. We've talked about the basics of the process of cultivating a bioactive enclosure in previous videos, so I won't divulge entirely, just know that this would be something you'd need to do for this species. Other than that, leave a moderately sized water bowl in the enclosure with dechlorinated water. Also leave a food bowl in with some sort of feeder insect in there, most ideally mealworms, waxworms, or hornworms dusted with repticalcium. You can leave these in the enclosure for the worm lizard to snack on, just make sure there's always at least 1 or 2 insects in the bowl each day, or every other day. With the bugs, you could also feed them pinky mice and night crawlers. Aside from that, the general decorations to be used could be small ferns and ficuses with rocks all around. No specific hides need to be provided since they'll be underground a majority of the time. Handling the crooked worm lizard would be quite easy. Worm lizards in general are not particularly inclined to bite, they're more likely to wiggle out of your hands. Even if you were bitten by one, their teeth aren't anything worrisome at all. I don't even think they'd leave a mark, and if they did, it'd hardly break the skin. Handling can be stressful for them though, since they feel exposed when not in the dirt. Don't handle worm lizards for longer than 15 minutes and make sure the whole body is supported. They're much easier to handle than, say, a monitor lizard, since these animals don't have claws, so they're not going to scratch you. When handling reptiles in general, they start off skittish, but as soon as they realize you're not a threat, they calm down. Breeding for this species, much like all other aspects of them, is hardly documented. So most of what I'll be discussing is based off other, more researched reptiles in a similar area or other worm lizards. This means that it's more comparable to speculation on this species' breeding patterns. It isn't entirely fact, but it's very possible that it's real. Right now, the only real way for me to write about this and have it be 100% correct is if I went there to Paraguay, scooped up some specimens, and studied them there. As much as I'd love to do that, it's not really something I can do. Get it? You get it. Either way, the crooked worm lizard is oviparous, meaning the species lays eggs. Their breeding season lasts from early April to late June, which is rather short compared to most reptiles. They produce 2 to 4 eggs per clutch, and 1 clutch per year. The gestation period for the average crooked worm lizard egg is roughly 2 months. The minimum age for sexual maturity is around 45 months. Other than that, there is no documented sexual dimorphism for this species. But that's going to be all for this installment of Herp Corner. As always, sources will be in the description, and if you're interested in the topic, I'd recommend looking further into their husbandry or history. If you learn something new with this one, feel free to subscribe. I do these every other week. Like the video to support the channel. Have a good evening, morning, or afternoon. Thank you for listening, watching, whatever, and I'll see you next time. They're much easier to handle than, say, a monitor lizard, since these animals don't have claws, so they aren't going to scratch you, and they don't have tails, so they're not really going to whip you. Well, no, cut that last part out. That's not real.